Hindu Center segment, Sanatana Hindu Center segment, Voice of Sanatana Hinduism. You are listening live on K-Breeze 106.1 FM or 102.1 FM HD3, or you can also listen by logging into www.sanatanahinducenter.org and then following the TuneIn app, or there is a button for the radio and you can listen this on your internet. And today's segment is History of Yoga. This segment will be starting in August, and we will announce the timing for you later on. But this will be under the banner of History of Bharatvarsha, and today's segment is History of Yoga. We have in our studio Sahana Singh and Dr. Raj Vedam, and I will hand over to them.
Namaskar. Welcome to the first episode of History of Bharatvarsha, a brand new program on this radio station brought to you by Indian History Awareness and Research, or IHAR. I am Sahana Singh, and with me is Raj Vedam. So from today onwards, every week we will bring you exciting episodes of Indian history from unique perspectives. Today is June 21st, 2015, and we are all celebrating International Yoga Day. It is only appropriate that we trace the history of yoga, one of the greatest gifts from our ancestors. So Raj, let me pick your brain for the benefit of the listeners. What are the earliest instances of yoga according to traditional accounts? The earliest instances.
Thank you, Sahana. Namaste to all our listeners. So in our traditional accounts, what we see is that the oral tradition maintains that Mahadeva Shiva himself was the Adiyogi, whose ecstatic dances in Mount Kailash attracted 7 seekers. These 7 seekers eventually became the Sapta Rishis, who learned the truth about yoga from Mahadeva himself, and they are supposed to have spread the tradition of yoga in the world.
Right. But what about our Vedas and Upanishads? Do they mention yoga?
Oh yes, but even before I talk about the Vedas or Upanishads to seek affirmation about yoga, it's very critical to keep note that when tracing the use of the word yoga in our scriptures, we should not get caught up in this mind block that the first use of the word indicates its point of origin.
Yeah.
For example, we might use the word breathing in English to refer to our involuntary drawing in and out of air. But did we not breathe before there was a language to describe it? So we should be very careful not to be caught in this mind block that yoga did not exist. There was no word for it in the Vedas or other places. But anyway, without embroiling ourselves yet in the geopolitical game of dating the Vedas, we can safely call out the instances where yoga is described in the Vedas and Upanishads. For example, in the Rig Veda, hymn 5.81.1, we have the first reference to yoga used in the context of yoga, as in Surya's chariot. Then we have the Upanishads, which are commentaries on the Vedas and maybe of antiquity as great as that. Again, we won't go into what is the antiquity because you have different opinions from different people, whether it is linguistic analysis or whether it is on the basis of astronomical dating based on phenomena found in these Upanishads. We can have dates ranging from 6,000 years old for the Upanishads on the basis of astronomical dating, for example by Balagangadhara Tilak. Or you can have people like Max Muller who use linguistic analysis and said that it's 1000 BCE. But let's not get caught up in that game. So in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, which is one of the earliest known Upanishads, there is mention of pranayama in the hymn 1.5.23. Then you have the Chandogya Upanishad, where the hymn 8.15 refers to the practice of pratyahara, which is concentrating of all of one's senses on the self. Now, there are also a group of Shivite sadhus, or if I may dare to call them yogis, who are called Ratya, and they are mentioned in the Arthava Veda. They emphasized body postures that might have later become the yogic asanas. We also have the Katha Upanishad, where the use of the word yoga has a similar meaning as a modern use of the word, which is to possess steady control of the senses, cessation of the mental activity, and leading to a supreme state. You also have Book 2 of the Sveteshavatara Upanishad, which states a procedure in which the body is held in an upright posture, the breath is restrained, and the mind is meditatively fixed in a quiet place. And if that is not enough, you have the Maitri Upanishad, where mention is made of the sixfold yoga method, which is pranayama, which is breath control, pratyahara, which is introspective withdrawal of the senses, dhyana, which is meditation, dharana, which is mind concentration, tarka, which is philosophical inquiry or creative reasoning, and finally samadhi, which is intense spiritual union or absorption. You also have the Taittiriya Upanishad, which defines yoga as a mastery of the body and senses. And among our audience, I'm sure everybody knows about the Bhagavad Gita, which expounds on Karma Yoga, the yoga of action, Bhakti Yoga, the yoga of devotion, and Jnana Yoga, the yoga of knowledge. So Sahanaji, what I want to say is that given the enormous amount of mention that we have of yoga, I think there should be no doubt at all that we have yoga mentioned all over our scriptures.
Right, that's a lot of evidence. But I was thinking that it's so hard to date these works given that they were passed on by oral tradition for a long period. So do you have any solid archaeological evidence of yoga?
Indeed. If you look at times measurable archaeologically, there is evidence of yogic poses. For example, if you refer to the famous Pashupati seal, Pashupati seal is a seal where you find a yogic figure sitting in an asana and with three heads in it. This famous Pashupati seal was found at Mohenjo-daro dating back to 3000 BCE. Then Professor S.R. Rao, who is a famous archaeologist who uncovered Lothar, discovered many terracotta figurines showing various yoga asanas. This shows that at least 5000 years ago, whether it was called yoga or not, we don't know, but there was practice of this in the region. Why I mention that is because we don't know what the Indus Valley script mentions because it's not been deciphered, and obviously we don't know how it sounded. So whether they called it yoga, we don't know. But what we know for a fact is that there were yoga asanas known at that period of time.
Right. And then what about the ancient Buddhist and Jain sources?
My feeling is that we should not be calling Buddhism or Jainism as distinct from Sanatana Dharma because they all share the same ecosystem, the same axioms, the same shared history, and more often than not, were practiced simultaneously by the population, in whose mind the sharp divisions of religion did not exist as it emphasized today. Let us, for example, note that Adinath of the Jains, which is Rishabhadev, is always shown in a yogic posture. So also Gautama Buddha, in his travails to attain nirvana, encounters many practitioners of extreme yoga. Gautama himself practiced withdrawal of senses, meditation, mind concentration, and philosophical inquiry on the human nature. All these are known elements of yoga as laid out in the Maitri Upanishad. Thus we should take care to note that the various sampradayas that arose in Bharat build on accepted foundations and sought to strengthen that edifice over time with intellectual offerings. So I would not see Buddhist and Jaina sources as distinct from Sanatana Dharma. We all belong to the same ecosystem.
Right. And I was wondering about the impact of yoga on other cultures. Is there any evidence of yoga impacting other cultures?
Oh, true enough. When we talk about yoga, you cannot stop but look at its impact on the world and other cultures. For example, the Greek scribes who accompanied Alexander in 327 BCE described yogis. They didn't call them yogis. They called them the gymnosophists.
Okay.
They practiced aloofness in different postures, standing, sitting, or lying motionless. Buddhist and Jain sources of the period also made critical impact on the populations that they spread to, and you know that the Buddhists and Jains were people who traveled a lot outside spreading the Dharma. For example, in China, Taoist meditation is an outcome of the impact of the sixfold yoga method. Vipassana, which S.N. Goenka described as being in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, made major impact on Taoist meditation. In Japan, this became Zazen meditation, or Zen for short. In Korea, the same thing became the Shon meditation. Now, if you look at other religions, for example, in Islam, the Sufis cherry-picked traditions of Hinduism that were not at odds with Islamic injunctions, the assimilation of which started with Islamic invasions of India and the subsequent encounters with yoga. The art of meditation or contemplation science was the subject of an entire section in the works of Imam Ghazali, who lived around the year 1050 of the current era in Iran, and it has been a core practice of the masters of the Naqshbandi order, where the default condition of mankind is immersion in the illusion of the world, and the object of meditation is to seek the reality behind the illusion. Now when you hear that, Sahana, I'm sure that it is, strikes an echo with our own practices over here.
Okay.
Now if that is not enough, you look at Christianity. Christianity encountered yoga along two paths. The eastern path picked it up from Buddhism and Hinduism, whereas the western path picked it up from Spain via the Muslims. The Eastern Orthodox Christians used a form of meditation called Hesychasm, I guess I'm pronouncing this right, Hesychasm, founded by Gregory in Armenia in the 6th century current era, where special postures and breathing rituals are used, accompanied by the repetition of a short prayer like a mantra. In Western tradition, Aquinas in the 13th century current era declared that meditation is necessary for devotion, and this was expanded upon by another spiritualist called John in the 16th century, and yet another spiritualist called Teresa of Avila, who meditated for hours each day using the rosary and contemplating Christian symbols. So by this you can see that yoga has made a major impact on all the philosophies of the world.
Right, and that is so fascinating. And I was also thinking about Kautilya's Arthashastra. Does that also have some mention of yoga?
Yes, indeed. So if we look at history, we see that Kautilya or Chanakya, who lived in 350 BCE, was a professor. Yes, they did have professors back then. Was a professor of economics and political science at the famous university at Takshila. And he was the advisor of the Mauryan emperor Chandragupta Maurya and his son Bindusara. Chanakya wrote a famous treatise called Arthashastra, in which in verse 1.2.10 states that there are three philosophies: the Samkhya, which is non-theistic, Yoga, which is theistic, and Lokayata, which is atheistic materialism.
Right. But the first name that comes to mind when we talk of yoga is Patanjali, right?
Yes, indeed, indeed. Yes, Patanjali lived in Gonda near Ayodhya in the 2nd century BCE. Now, this is a little dicey when you look at history, because there is some controversy regarding the date of Patanjali, and I'll just call it out in a minute. So anyway, the Patanjali in the 2nd century BCE refers to the invasion of the Greeks of the town of Saketa, which is also Ayodhya. Now we know that this event happened around 120 BCE. Now Patanjali is most famous for his treatise, the Yoga Sutras, and the Bhashya, or the commentaries of the Sutras. He is also associated with works on grammar and Ayurveda. But a linguistic analysis of the language suggests an antiquity that is far greater than 120 BCE. So this opens a possibility that there were different Patanjalis in different periods. But whatever be the date of Patanjali, the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali contain 196 aphorisms, sutras or stanzas that constitute the foundation of Ashtanga Yoga or Raja Yoga.
It could even be that maybe one Patanjali was named after the other Patanjali, right?
True enough, it could have been an honorific at Patanjali.
Right. So what do these Yoga Sutras of Patanjali talk about?
So there are Patanjali's Yoga Sutras we can think about broadly in 4 chapters. Patanjali used very terse Sanskrit language, as was expected of scholars of his era, where all of his 96 sutras could be written on just one poster-sized sheet.
Yeah.
Just in one sheet you could write all of them. The language is so terse, but communicated an enormous amount of information.
So dense language, you could call it.
True enough, true enough. And in those days, knowledge of Sanskrit to describe these things was a mark of erudition and scholarship. And he possessed that. So the 4 chapters of Patanjali you can think of as one. The first one is Samadhi Pada, and it refers to a blissful state when the yogi is absorbed into the Supreme One. Then you have the Sadhana Pada, which refers to the practice or discipline, and here Patanjali is referring to Kriya Yoga, which is also Karma Yoga, and also Ashtanga Yoga, which is the 8-fold yoga. Then the 3rd chapter you have the Vibhuti Pada, referring to Siddhi, or the supernatural powers that you can acquire by the simultaneous practice of dharana, dhyana and samadhi. Kaivalya Pada is the 4th chapter and refers to moksha or liberation, which is the goal of yoga. So these are the 4 main chapters of Patanjali.
Right. But Ashta in Sanskrit means 8. So does Ashtanga Yoga have 8 parts to it or something?
Yes, indeed. The Ashtanga Yoga refers to 8 practices, and these capture the essence of yoga in all its forms and do not try to box it into just a few exercises. For example, the first one, Yama, refers to 5 abstentions. Now these relate to how we relate to the external world as a person. So the 5 attributes are, abstentions are ahimsa or non-violence, satya or truth, asteya or non-covetousness or removal of desire for objects, brahmacharya which is abstinence, and aparigraha which is non-possessiveness or non-hoarding. The second practice is niyama, and it refers to 5 observances, and these are related on how we relate to ourselves or our inner world. The first one was our relation to the external world, the second one is our relation to the inner world. And in these 5 observances you have saucha, which is cleanliness of body and mind, santosha, which is satisfaction, tapas or austerity for body discipline and mental control, swadhyaya, which is study of Vedic scriptures, and ishvara pranidhana, which is dedicating all effort to surrender to God. The third practice is asana, which is the discipline of the body with rules of postures to keep it disease free, and a physical aid to meditation. Pranayama referring to control of life force energies, concentration of the mind. Pratyahara referring to withdrawal of senses from external objects. Dharana, which is concentration of the mind or chitta on a physical object like a flame or a murti. Dhyana refers to meditation. And dhyana meditation is the act of meditation where the object of meditation remains distinct and separate from the act of meditation, which is a very subtle thing in Hinduism. The final one is samadhi, where there is oneness with the object of meditation, meaning there is no distinction between the act of meditation and the object of meditation. So these are the 8 practices in Ashtanga Yoga of Patanjali.
Right. And Raj, you said that Hatha Yoga has roots in Patanjali's Ashtanga Yoga. But can you elaborate more on Hatha Yoga?
Indeed. Hatha Yoga asanas have been found in terracotta figurines from Harappa, Lothal and Mohenjo-daro, hinting great antiquity for the practice. Residents of the Indus Valley civilization, which also we know, for example, when we look at the ruins and read about Indus Valley civilization, we know that they were a very clean people in society. They practiced town planning, they practiced cleanliness, they had fantastic sewage systems and other things which led to taking the waste of the population out to a different place, keeping the water sources separate from the waste sources and so on. And they also practiced non-violence. After so much of excavation in Indus Valley civilization, we still don't have artifacts that show swords or any kind of weapons of war. That shows they practiced non-violence. Now, the funny thing is, if you look at all these things, the residents of the Indus Valley civilization lived life according to at least the first 3 practices that were described by Patanjali in his Ashtanga Yoga, the Yama, Niyama and Asana. In contemporary literature, if you move away from the Indus Valley civilization and see where else Hatha Yoga is mentioned, you see Gorakshanath, who lived in the 10th century current era. He authored several books which describe Hatha Yoga. Hatha Yoga describes the human body made up of networks of 72,000 pathways called nadis. Now, Hatha Yoga aims at purification and balancing of the nadis. At least 84 asanas were practiced in traditions of Hatha Yoga before colonial times. A number of gurus between the 10th century current era to current times expanded and refined the practice. A work found in the Mysore palace called Sri Tattva Nidhi describes 122 postures. So when you look at the modern schools of Hatha Yoga, they all derive from the works of Thirumalai Krishnamacharya, who taught from the year 1924 to 1989. Among his students who popularized this in the West were Patabi Joyce, BKS Iyengar, Indra Devi, and TKV Desikachai. So this rounds up the practice of Hatha Yoga from the very great antiquity to the current times.
Thank you so much, Raj. And I think now we should open our phone lines and ask listeners to send their questions. The number is 832-361-0625. Please call and give your questions and we'll see if we can answer. We have time to answer them. And meanwhile, I think we can continue. Raj?
Yeah, I will have a couple of things I want to ask you. Okay, now in the Mahabharata and specifically in the Vishnu Sahasranam, there are names, Yoga, Yoga Vinda. So Yoga Vinda means the one who knows the yoga. That is the name of the Sri Vishnu. So there is a one reference also. Then in our Shastras, or Vedanga, 6 philosophies of Hindu Shastras, yoga is one of them. And it's been practiced, and this philosophy has been practiced for years and years, and I don't know if we can even put the date on that.
True enough, Kantiji. I think the antiquity is very much there. The practice is indelibly intertwined with our civilization.
And recently, French tried to define meditation, and they started with, therefore I think, that's the famous words of French philosopher. Now, in the meditation, it's totally different. We are trying to stop thinking in the meditation. Here and it is therefore he thinks. And I think it's totally different meaning, or they try to define what they could not get the gist of the meditation.
True enough, Kantiji. If you look at our own philosophical methods, our philosophers of ancient past realized that our entanglement with the world of objects, emotions and thoughts through our senses is how we relate to the external world. And they saw that leads us away from the path of understanding nature, our purpose and so on. So they saw it that we need to shut ourselves from the senses and go on an inward journey. And this inward journey is what allows us to finally accomplish understanding the divine nature of ourselves. I guess this is because of a fundamental schism in the Western philosophies, or if I may call it the Abrahamic philosophies, the Sanatana Dharma philosophies. The human nature in Sanatana Dharma is seen as divine, and the human nature in Abrahamic sampradayas, if you will, are seen as fallen.
Sinners.
If you could call it sinners. So this is the fundamental difference between the two. And because we see our nature as divine, I guess our task as a Hindu is to dispel avidya and to try and understand our true nature. And yoga certainly provides us the forum and the mechanism to do that.
Very famous words of Swami Vivekananda. Every human being is divine. And we are trying to explore that, not our sins or anything like that.
True enough. Very true. Very true.
And Raj, I have a quick comment. From all the historical sources you have detailed, it is clear that yoga has such a deep, integral, organic connection with Hinduism. So I would describe it as a fundamental approach that facilitates a Hindu to achieve the bigger goal of self-realization. But nowadays there's a tendency to divorce yoga from its Hindu roots. So if you see the United Nations, even they have been very careful to not include the Hindu context of yoga when they declared the International Yoga Day. So what are your thoughts on this?
Sahana, this is a subject that is so loaded because the contemporary usage of the word yoga and the propensity of religions that are encroaching, if you will, or appropriating, if you will, some of the intellectual properties of Sanatana Dharma. So this is a subject that is very contentious. To me, we talk now about the history of yoga that spans more than 6,000 years, and we showed how it is tied so deeply with the practices of the people of Bharat, with our philosophy, with our understanding of human nature, with our understanding of life itself. And it's an integral part of who we are. It's an integral part of what we export into the external world also, to other philosophies on yoga. So with knowledge of the history of yoga, to me it is absolutely bizarre when people delink yoga from the practice of Hinduism. It's a matter of deep concern when the methods of yoga are appropriated by other religions. Because by secularizing the practice of yoga, they are weakening the fundamental treasures of Hinduism. So Hinduism has got a lot of treasures.
Right.
Now when you take every treasure of Hinduism and say, this is not Hinduism, this is secular, and you take it away from Hinduism, and what you leave behind in Hinduism is all the things you don't want, which you can happily bash in forums and say that, oh, this is there in Hinduism, feminism, and inequalities and all kinds of things that people lump with Hinduism. So I completely resent that. I believe that we should as Hindus take care to protect our intellectual property. These are gifts given to us by our ancestors. Our ancestors have worked tremendously hard to uncover these truths, and it is our duty as Hindus to protect these gifts and try to make sure that we enrich this offering and pass it on to future generations.
Right. Time to wrap up now.
Okay.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Vedam and Sarnaji. And it was a pleasure to see you here live in studio. And we will have more occasions to continue this discussion as well as the new segment coming up in August, the history of Bharatvarsha.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.